Welcome everyone, and let's go ahead and get started. We got plenty to cover. So, the product operating model is a relatively new concept championed by Marty Kagan and many others in the field. His latest book, Transformed, really does a great job of outlining the principles of the model, although it doesn't always give you all the details about how to go about executing those because he himself is very much against um, prescriptive processes. However, you can get lots of examples of how to run effectively in the product operating model in this presentation, as well as through others who offer some guidance that you would normally get from a very expensive product coach. Uh, the goal of the model is to transform how you build, how you solve problems, and how do you choose which problems to solve. So we're working backwards from delivering to the customer. And the roots of this really exist inside of design thinking and lean startup. And it is a way of integrating those approaches to a full extent, as well as, of course, agile. So there are many different models by which technology interacts with other parts of the business. One of the big differences between the product operating model and other models is the fact that in the product operating model, we have a direct connection between those who are defining the product and the customers. But in other models, we see different emphases in terms of how technology enables the business to succeed. So the most classic is the IT model, where IT is treated as a cost center, and it is the location where all of the development is focused on serving the business and the business needs. And normally, projects are initiated through some complex process, usually involving a committee or through directors and their lines of business. But the IT model is one that really tries to departmentalize IT. Another model is the project model. This is usually run by the chief financial officer. The goal is to create returns for the business. It could be projects that are operating and focusing on the customer or internally to improve operations. But it is decided upon usually again by leadership in terms of the best return for each of these investments. There's also the feature team model, which is one where features are identified by usually by a single product leader or a couple of leaders, and the interaction is primarily between stakeholders and the teams to gather up feature requests and then deliver them. You can also have a sales-driven model where the goal is to satisfy the needs of the sales team in order to make sales to different customers. Oftentimes, that will result in a very complex, technical, debt-ridden product, but it will, in the short term, solve a lot of sales issues. Or a marketing-driven model where the focus is primarily on being at feature parity with others in the market and trying to come up with the right features to position and sell. All of these are totally different from the product model. The product model is all about engaging with customers and solving problems for them in a way that makes them excited and delighted to engage with your product, but also that works for the business, which is a very key constraint. So, to give an example of how all these models are different, I want to jump into the story of the product model at Spotify. The product model at Spotify was used in the process of reacting to a pretty significant threat. The background is that there was this threat in terms of in 2014, Spotify was the leader in terms of the streaming industry, but it faced intense competition from giants like Google, Amazon, and Apple. And while they had the majority of the streaming service market, they knew that this was going to be a significant challenge. Now, with all of these competitors coming on the rise, Spotify originally had as its plan to try and diversify into video streaming as a streaming service, but they decided to reallocate their resources and focus on streaming services for their music and to make them more appreciative. So the CEO, Daniel Ek, provided the strategic direction to emphasize the solving of problems for some key segments of their customer base. And the way they did this was they segmented in terms of two different types of listeners. There's a lean forward listener that was kind of their early adopter listener, the kind that would actively select playlists and add it to their Spotify playlists and were really passionate about music, and they were very actively engaged in selecting what they wanted. And then there were the lean back listeners who were passive listeners who really just wanted to turn on and experience the music. And they also wanted to have the selection somewhat made for them. And so oftentimes they were experiencing Spotify in the context of doing something else. In order to make sure that they retained and grew as a company, they focused in particular on these lean back listeners by enhancing music recommendations and figuring out how to solve that problem. So, um, this led ultimately to the development of what was called Discovery Weekly, but it was actually a capability that was based upon an early feature that they had, which was a year of music playlist. And this year of music playlist would, or wrapped, would be provided to anyone who is listening to Spotify, and it would be the list of all the top songs that you had listened to for the last year. And based upon the level of engagement, which continued for multiple months with this playlist in particular among users and in the lean back user segment, they started to experiment with how they could create playlists for the lean back listeners that would be as successful as this was. So they started to experiment using things like Hack Weeks, which is very popular at Spotify, and they discovered that they could use what are a form of data science where they were able to identify matching profiles between groups of listeners and essentially leverage one profile to inform the other. And this led to Discover Weekly, which was the news service being offered. But they didn't just roll it out right away. They first rolled it out internally to their own teams, and actually they did it even in secret. They released the feature, and they saw how some of the people at Spotify who had Spotify were going to interact with it. And then once they everyone said they liked it, and they were starting to use it based upon user feedback and also based upon the usage, they did a proper internal release. All of this is called dog fooding, where you essentially try it out for yourself internally. And then they were allowed to, without any prior authorization, release up to 5% of users this capability. And so they did a 1.5% rollout, which is about a million users. And they tagged that rollout with the ability to get feedback in the form of surveys. And those surveys overwhelmingly said that this is exactly what people were looking for, and that people just had totally fallen in love with the feature. However, uh, it wasn't going to go without some challenges, which included things like technical feasibility. But because of the fact that they knew that this was going to be so successful, they were able to roll this out and to refactor Spotify in order to support this at a full 100% launch. In the end, it was resoundingly successful. Over a billion tracks were streamed. 71% of listeners added at least one song from this playlist to their personal playlist, and 60% of those who tried it streamed 5 tracks or more from that list. And all of those engagement metrics were critical. They also got more qualitative feedback, like those who tweeted things such as, got really excited and started crying a little bit because tomorrow I realized it's Monday and Spotify is making me a new Discover Weekly. So when you have implementation like this, and you're able to get this kind of reaction from users and customers, you know that you're going to be successful and that you can retain them and your market share. So in doing so, they were able to build this highly personalized playlist. The team dynamics were such that every team that worked on this was a fully empowered product team that included product managers, designers, engineers. They worked through value, usability, and feasibility risks by incrementally testing different forms of this. They were able to do experimentation even up to a small percentage of live usership, up to 5%, and Daniel Ek, who was the CEO, he identified that there were potentially issues with this, and he wasn't fully on board with it at the beginning. But the fact that they had data and the fact that they were empowered to solve this problem, he allowed them to continue to work on this problem, and then eventually even signed off on refactoring significant parts of the recommendation algorithms, which required a lot of investment in order to roll it out. And it ultimately led to significant success. And of course, Spotify continues to fend off, the big FANG stocks that are continuing to try to win over more and more of this market. So this is an example of empowered product teams uh, working at a problem based upon data, based upon insights, even against necessarily the wishes of the CEO in terms of what they think will work, and ultimately being successful through incrementally experimenting and solving problems for their customers. The this is exactly what the operating model is proposing, and it's what is different about this model versus any other model when it comes to being a technology enabled product or service company. So now I want to go over some of the key aspects to this model so that you have an understanding of exactly what it takes to deliver. So we've got the product trio, which is the core group that is always working on discovery at some level, and they would include the product manager, and her focus will be on the customer, understanding the data, being um, very aware of what works for the business, and understanding business concerns across all the different functions, as well as understanding the market and what the opportunities are. There will also be the product designer, and he will be someone who owns the user experience and really understands and maps out the user journey, and usually is the one that's working in this product trio to develop prototypes that can be used to rapidly test and get feedback. And their responsibility is to ensure user outcomes. And then there's the tech lead, and he or she will be focused on ensuring feasibility and being able to inform buildability in these early tests, as well as run experiments and simulations as needed in order to develop a very feasible concept that can then be brought up to a full full release across all of your users. And then there's one more person who needs to be talked about, and that is the product leader. And the product leader is something that requires significant amount of training and retraining. Product leaders have a number of different responsibilities that make them capable of creating empowered product teams and growing empowered product teams. The first part is they need to be great at coaching and working with people to develop their skills. And that's true in each one of the verticals that we just talked about: product design, technology, or engineering. And they need to be rigorous in terms of how they staff and hire people. And that part is an ongoing part of the work that actually is significant for any product leader, because the number one thing that comes with developing a product team is ensuring that you have the right people who are on that product team. That's always step one. In addition, they also have the responsibility to create really compelling product visions. We're going to talk about a few different types of those. They need to understand how to organize product teams into team topologies, which we're going to go over as well. Product strategy, how to define the ways to get from here to that product vision where you're going, and then also being very good at developing team objectives and coaching teams to develop those objectives. So in the end, what we want is a team that can go through each one of these stages, where based upon strategic objectives developed based upon business strategy, we go through continuous customer discovery, and product delivery, where we are solving for key problems of: is this a problem we're solving? How do we solve that problem effectively? And then how do we build in a way that's scalable, reliable, and performant? And while this might look a little bit waterfally, it's not. It is actually a continuous set of processes that are informing each other, and they are running in parallel. These are the techniques that you can expect to use in each one of these: concierge, inventory keys, and interviews for figuring out what problem is worth solving and exploring that. We're going to talk a little bit more about the details of discovery. Also, high fidelity prototyping for testing out value and usability. Also, viability can be tested this way as well. And then feasibility, you'll use high fidelity prototypes as well as other architectural spikes. And then for product delivery, we'll talk about this in our next uh, webinar, where we're going to get into the details of how do you do featureful releases at scale on cadence to achieve these goals of all the ILIDs: performance, maintainability, reliability, scalability. So we'll get there. But today we're going to focus mostly on those aspects that lead up to that delivery. And reminder, this is not waterfall. So let's talk first and work our way backwards about how you build. Um, Changing how you build is step one to transforming into the product model. And the reason why is because if you don't have the enabling infrastructure, if you don't have the teams in place that can fully own their part of the product, then you're going to end up in a place where the teams are in conflict, there's confusion, or you simply can't run any of the tests or experiments you need to in order to achieve the product model. So what we want are teams that have continuous interaction with the customer through experiments, as well as access to the data that they need. To be effective, you need to deploy at least once every 2 weeks into an environment that can be interacted with the customer. Obviously, it takes time to develop those architectures that will allow you to do that if you're not there already. It really is, though, about being able to run experiments. And then with the team topologies in place that empower teams to own their part of the product or products, and the enabling infrastructure, you can actually build in a way and have teams that own problems to solve. Really, what this is about is instilling a true DevOps culture where product managers can um, easily test different hypotheses that they have and get feedback through analytics, through rapid self-service deployed tests or automated tests, um, based upon having all the structure in place that they need to run those tests. And a lot of this comes down to building in a different way. So I oftentimes talk about this when it comes to product and agile, which is that you need to build differently and you need to architect for flexibility if you're going to try to really move into a model which has all the benefits of this rapid customer interaction, and the ability to respond to customer needs. When it comes to building systems, there are tightly coupled architectures which have lots of reuse of services that are reused by features, and they're shared by features, which all work together to deliver the app. And, in a perfect world, if we could predict all of the features and all of the services and do so with complete accuracy, or if it's simply a complicated problem that we have solved many times before, these architectures may work. The issue is changing anything underneath the feature layer requires refactoring all the other features because of the dependencies that we see here. If I change service 3, it impacts how feature 2 and 3 work, which means I have to change underlying services 2 and 4, and those are going to impact at least the other features as well. And so that means any change has huge costs. Now we can get some leverage by putting what's called a platform underneath, where services are extended based upon some shared main platform. And that actually is a very valid way of achieving agility at scale. You essentially want to design just enough platform, and then you can extend each one of your features with each of the services that you need as you grow. And you end up with this kind of leverage. And that is one of the strategies you can use in order to build faster at scale. Ultimately, the most flexible, most agile are these kind of cloud native designs where you have features that have fully uncoupled architectures, and underneath, all services are independent and they're able to service the features and be changed without any impact across the rest of the application. And so this is what we call a decoupled design. And so understanding that we want to be in this area for the ability to be flexible and make changes and adapt is really key. This also changes in terms of our strategies for how we go about improving our engineering. So if there's a problem in your engineering within your location and you're trying to build a feature, you can isolate and absorb any of the issues from the other features simply by building more in your location. Costs a little bit more, but it's a lot more flexible. And but if you can't do that, um, we can at least work together in teams that are doing big room planning to come up with shared features in a lean way. We can also have dotted line teams that will extend, for specialized services or for shared architecture, also in kind of a lean way. But if we have to, because of technical limitations and really pushing the extreme, we can fall back into phase delivery for predictive, but we want to avoid that. There are a lot of reasons why we want to avoid big batch delivery. I'm not going to go over all of them in great detail, but I just want you all to kind of get a sense of the reasons why we want to avoid those, which is that when we create um, really big, large batches, we create very uneven demand for resources across our teams. We create specifications, and those specifications means that we pull the people that know our customer the best away from actual delivery because of the fact that they are they're no longer available to work on the teams because they have to work on all this planning work instead. And I know many of you on the call have been in that situation where the critical resource that you need in order to get feedback on your design is too busy working with maybe people who are in leadership who want to define the next thing you're going to build. So we want to avoid that. We also want to avoid the fact that customer experts have to end up cramming and rushing their work, and therefore their specifications aren't any good. And as a result, because of the fact that the attempts to plan for this kind of disruption always fail, we end up with lots of start and stop within all of our teams. We also, if you do big batch designs, you end up with designs that are overly draconian. It really bores the developers, and the specs that they get just aren't interesting. They don't have any ownership. The detailed design almost always accumulates defects because it hasn't been fully tested, and it depreciates rapidly. We end up When we end up testing at the end of these big batches, we reveal lots of defects, and usually we end up with a whole lot of firefighting. Lessons learned are lost because everything that we do is so infrequent that we really can't get a chance to learn because of these long cycles. And so we really want to work instead in small batches. Um, there are a lot of benefits to working in small batches and having small teams. One of the things that we've identified that we know from study that was done at Bell Labs and evangelized by Jeff Sutherland in this book about Scrum, doing twice the work in half the time, is that you can actually achieve great performance by simply increasing the level of information that people have about what other people are doing that's relevant to them. And that is a measure of what we call communication saturation. And the way to reduce communication saturation, or sorry, the way to improve communication saturation is to reduce the number of roles on the team. And this is, again, the reason why we want to focus in on product managers, designers, tech leads, who have engineers working for them. And that's it. And we just, in Scrum, you only have 3 roles. In this product operating model, we emphasize having a key designer involved because of the fact that we want to do this early testing as well. We want to put teams together, co-located in what's called caves and commons. Again, this is more agile, but the important thing here is that everybody is able to talk to each other easily. They can walk in and have common areas where they can do problem solving, and as well as caves to focus, and they can pair up and work on problems as needed, and they are not going to be interrupted in terms of their work. There are lots of ways that we can also ensure that teams are able to get the information that they need, and this is through the processes of having regular scrums to reduce other meetings and meta scrums. We can use charts on the walls. We can post capabilities of test equipment in the hall outside of a lab. We can put examples of current and future designs that are in process. We can use meeting clocks and essentially try to saturate the environment with lots of information that can be used in order to emphasize where we are, what we're doing, what's coming next. So again, we can reduce the amount of interruption on teams and instead try to use full systems of information. So now we got to talk a little bit about team topology, because topology is critical to being able to create teams that have true independence and empowered product managers. So team topology is based upon this concept of cognitive load. It has been again evangelized by uh, Michael Skelton and Matthew Pais and their book Team Topologies, which is quite good. I'm going to give you a very short little crash course on it, but the idea is that we have certain types of loads that we have whenever solving problems. We have intrinsic loads that are fundamental to the task space. We have extrinsic loads that are relating to how do I do this inside of this environment? How do I deploy this thing? How do I configure the service? Who do I need to talk to get approvals? And then there's the germane load, which is all about solving the problem, which is where we want most of our teams to focus. And the thing is that the more tightly coupled our architecture is, the more we add extraneous load onto these teams. And the more restrictive our designs are, the more we add more intrinsic cognitive load, but we really want to emphasize germane load. That's where we want all of our teams to focus. And the best way to do that is to have small distributed teams that aren't always interacting across the teams all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this highly predictive monolith and we're going to look for something that are called fracture planes. Fracture planes are based upon this idea of having a monolithic rock that you need to break it in places where splitting it will form coherent pieces that and will successfully break hard. And then you'll be able to move towards more of a decoupled design. And the way we do that is by creating different types of teams in the end. Once we've decided on our fracture planes, we're going to have streamlined teams, which are focused on applications. They're going to be the majority of your teams. And they're going to have different types of interaction modes with other teams, like enabling teams that are there to help solve problems as well as coach and add new capabilities into streamlined teams. And then there are going to be complicated subsystem teams, and these are rare, but they exist for the purposes of containing um, highly specialized resources that are going to develop services that any team can use that are going to um, allow for the streamlined teams to not have a need to have their own specialists. And the idea is that by having these three team types as well as platform teams that can also um, absorb and create services that remove all the extraneous and intrinsic load and allow for streamlined teams to focus on germane load, we can create a much more uh, lighter and simpler task and problem for the streamlined teams to solve. And they're going to have different interaction modes. You're going to have collaboration where teams work together to define like a new API, a practice, or technology, and that might be during the period where a complicated subsystem team works with a streamlined team. You're going to have interactions which are as a service, which really help to decouple the teams from each other. Facilitation, that's where the enabling team or another team is working to help another, mentor, guide, grow them. And then with those three types of interaction modes, you can combine your teams together. And there's a way that you can transform over time. So if at first you have the need to work closely during discovery as you're figuring out a new service, you can have two teams highly overlap and collaborate, and they're going to go slow during that time. But then as they develop out a shared service or a way of interacting with each other, they can move to an as a service architecture. And this can allow you to essentially strangle out all of your dependencies. And you can do this with platform teams to relieve your teams. And you can do this with complicated subsystem teams to basically allow yourself to grow and continue to develop teams that have the right level of cognitive load. The other last piece is that no matter what you do, all of your teams need telemetry. And so You're going to have streamlined teams that are working with as a service connections to a big platform team, which may have an inner platform team. When asked how deep do the platforms go, it goes as deep as you need to. And the platform teams will then be able to also gather telemetry and serve that back. And the idea is this is going to be a much better way of teams working together. So, in cases where you have layers of abstraction, what happens is those teams that are in the platform that are servicing product teams that are directly interacting with customers, developing services and products for them, those teams are going to be actually looking for the developer experience and trying to improve the experience of developers in their teams. And oftentimes they're going to be your strongest developers. And they're going to be focused on trying to make the product teams go as fast as possible. Most within the platform should be focused on supporting streamlined teams, not lots and lots of inter-platform teams. If you're doing that, then your platform is too big. We want to go for the thinnest viable. A good ratio is that you want to have 6:1 to 9:1 in terms of application to product to platform teams. And as you think about how to move forward and deliver and build out your team topologies and to build out your ability to work together well as an organization, you want to think about how you're enabling three things. And this comes from a great new book by Gene Kim and Steven Spear, which is slow vacation, the ability for teams to run fast experiments but to slow down in terms of solving problems. Simplification, making sure that teams are as decoupled and modular as possible, that they're able to incrementally innovate and they have very clean processes for doing their work. And amplification, which is all about getting signals through telemetry and getting information back from the product and back from users. And the ways that you can decouple into this operating model is to look at different fracture planes we talked about earlier. They can be business domains, regulatory compliance, team location, risk, user personas. Basically, fracture planes can be found in lots of places. It really depends on your company. So now we talked about building differently. And a lot of the things that I didn't go over are basics of Scrum and basics of Agile, because my assumption is that you have good processes for that if you're here at this talk. What I wanted to talk about there was you need to actually become capable of having fully empowered product teams. And like the number one key to making that work is what we just talked about, which was heavily focused on team topologies. But now we need to talk about how, with these empowered product teams focused on the customer, you're going to be able to develop, you're going to be able to solve problems more effectively. And here we're really going to be leveraging highly design and data science, as well as looking at underlying needs and how we can potentially aggressively test underlying assumptions. So, in developing a true discovery culture, the product trio is going to work together to create a shared experience map for your customer. And that shared experience map is going to be a place where you can look for different outcomes and opportunities. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that our team is regularly meeting with customers to learn about what their opportunities are. And we're talking about any problems to solve, any desires that can be enhanced. And we want to make sure that we are delighting the customers as well. And in this process, we want to continuously interact with customers at least on a weekly basis. And as we identify opportunities and assumptions within those opportunities and solutions that can solve those opportunities, we want to rapidly and aggressively test them. So this diagram here comes from Product Talk, which is company by Teresa Perez. She has a really wonderful website. I highly recommend you go there. But one of her top techniques for creating a product discovery culture is to use what's called the opportunity solution tree. And this is what you see here. So based upon some target outcome, which is negotiated between the product leader and the product team. The product trio is working together to discover potential opportunities that could achieve this product outcome. And those opportunities are going to have sub opportunities, and they're going to then have solutions. And the solutions are going to, we're not going to just identify one. We're going to identify many, many, many solutions, because the reality is that we want to really get at the underlying assumptions and be able to test them. So as you meet with customers weekly and interview them, you'll identify new opportunities. Um, as solutions evolve, your understanding of the opportunity also evolves, and you can then develop out prototypes and other experiments to evaluate potential solutions and to see if they're worth taking forward. So what's really important here is that this outcome that we're going for may be um, a product outcome, a business outcome. Likely, it's not going to be a traction metric, but it's important to understand the difference between those. The business outcome is an outcome that is a lagging indicator, but it is ultimately our number one measure of success, such as the number of purchases or the revenue per month or the revenue per customer. But we can also identify product outcomes, which predict those business outcomes, and are linked through data and experimentation. A really good example is from the product model at Spotify, where the way that they measured and predicted success was in terms of the um, the fact that there were 1 billion tracks streamed, that 71% of listeners added at least one song to our personal playlist, and 60% of them tried Discover Weekly, proceeded to stream 5 or more tracks. Those are not revenue measurements as you would expect with a business outcome. Those are product outcomes, but they predict that those engagement metrics predict whether or not you're going to have the business outcomes of retention and continued subscription to the service. So that's the example there. Sometimes you might have an example like with Airbnb, where you can create a product outcome, which is uh, able to immediately deliver business outcomes. And one of the best stories about this, a growth hacking example, is the story about how Spotify created a service to provide professional photographs for Airbnb listings. And it just rapidly grew by 2 to 3 times the number of signups that would happen per listing, and it rapidly grew their business in terms of nights booked. And this was in the New York area. Um, what they were able to do was they ran small experiments. They were able to identify that having the photos led immediately to a higher likelihood of a purchase. And so the product outcome that they were going for were the percent of listings that had professionally photographed photos of the Airbnb locations. And that became their primary metric that they optimized around once they moved into delivery. You can also have traction metrics, which are engagement with a specific feature. And sometimes that can be really useful for optimizing certain aspects like of landing pages and things like that. But it's important to differentiate that between these key metrics that really drive business outcomes. Okay, so here's an example for someone who is uh, wanting to understand how do we move from having opportunities, outcomes that we want, to opportunities to actual solutions, and then how do we rapidly move through and get to testing those ideas so that we are interacting with customers at least on a weekly basis to test our assumptions, our underlying assumptions. Well, here's an example that comes again from Product Talk. It's an example where we have a blog that wants to increase the number of readers, and the way they're going to do that is they want to explore the opportunity where someone knows someone who should read this article, and they have a couple of solutions. They could have an add a social media share button, add an option to email, full text, and add the option to text someone the title. And so what they're going to do is they're going to map out this idea in terms of what one of the solutions would have. In this case, add a social media button, and they're going to talk about the steps that the user is going to take, and then look at the underlying assumptions of those tests, which are things like decides to share the article, and the assumption is readers want to share the article. Clicks on share the article, readers will notice that there's a option to share the article. Select social media network to share on. Reader uses social media. Reader has connected to social media account. So all these assumptions exist underneath what would be a normal. Well, I know how to implement that. We'll put in a button where they can share the social media network this article, and then people can review it and post it. And these underlying assumptions need to be tested though. So what we need to look for is this something that somebody would want? Is it feasible? Is it usable? Does it work for us? Is it ethical to do it? Will it get us into trouble and create more risk? And based upon the types of assumptions that we're making, we can then categorize those assumptions in terms of things that we need to really test. And those things that we really need to test are those areas, those assumptions that we think are critically important, but we don't have a lot of evidence for. And this is called the leap of faith assumptions. So after mapping out our good idea, we come up with what are our underlying assumptions about the key risks. We put them on this David Bland's assumption mapping grid, and we focus in and we say, okay, what kind of tests can we run in order to get answers on this assumption right away? And if we do that, then there's lots of different tests we can run: prototype tests, one question survey tests, data mining, research spike. If we do that, then we can actually test not just one assumption. We can test multiple assumptions, and we can test multiple solutions, because a lot of those solutions share underlyingly the same assumptions. And that's actually one of the beauties of these trees, is that if you can find shared assumptions, you can actually eliminate bad ideas in droves. And then you can design a test to make sure and to see if that's what exactly you should do. You can use unmoderated testing platforms, in-product survey tools, prototyping tools, data synthesis. But the idea is that there are many ways to test underlying assumptions. You can do it rapidly, and these smaller tests can very quickly identify groups of solutions that won't work. So at this point, we've taken some objectives. We've gone through and we are doing customer discovery by talking with customers on a regular basis to identify opportunities. And if we want to go into that direction, we are then developing tests that can be anywhere up to high fidelity prototypes to rapidly test underlying assumptions and to see if this was worth scaling up. And then we can get to product delivery. So this is where we've been focused. But if we're going to actually finish solving all this, the whole problem about how do you become a product operating model company, we have to go back one more step. And that is, we got to talk about changing how you decide to solve what problems to solve. That is the key to really changing all of this. It's a huge culture shift. But the idea is that you need to have vision and big ideas. You have to identify the big challenges and problems to solve on a strategic, outcome-based roadmap, and then focus your company and its resources on the key problems, and identify the priorities and dynamics in your company. So what we want to do is we want to avoid and escape the build trap. One of my favorite authors in this space is Melissa Perry, and she talks about the build trap. I highly recommend that you check out her talk. It's fantastic. She's a lot of fun in terms of the way that she tells her stories, and I highly recommend learning from her. But it's important to start with, as we talk about what problems to solve and how we develop strategy, what we're not going to do. We're not going to do a list of features. And we don't want a list of features developed by the C-suite or sourced from customers or based on competitor analysis that attempt to cover all aspects of the problem of the product, or pulls people in multiple directions. Because when we do that, we end up falling into this build trap of having these long lists of features that we're fully committed to. And as soon as you say you're going to do it, you got to do it. And it becomes enormous amounts of debt in terms of planning, in terms of execution. And what drives us to want to create these lists of features and these feature roadmaps is the fact that we run into what are effectively gaps in any strategy that tries to be top down. And I'm going to go through each one of them. The first one is the knowledge gap, and that's the gap between the outcomes that we want and how our plans will achieve those outcomes. And it's the difference between what we would like to know and what we actually know. So we don't actually have the insights yet to develop a good list of features. So as a result, we end up wanting to develop out plans with features, but that's not a good idea because of the fact that we don't know yet what's going to actually solve problems. We haven't done the assumption testing. So the trap is demanding detailed info from teams and trying to get lots and lots of data from them on every aspect of what it is that they're seeing. And the solution is to avoid doing all that and to instead define strategic intent and business goals. I'm going to talk about how you can do that. Next is the alignment gap, where the trap is demanding more detailed instructions and specifications on exactly how you're going to build those features and exactly what they're going to be able to do, because what we planned as features usually don't operate the same way that we expected them to. And the difference there ends up being this alignment gap between the actual actions that we take and the things that we actually implement and what they were originally intended to do. So instead, if you provide an intent, you can just let each product team define in their own way how they're going to go about achieving it. And then lastly, there's the effects gap, which is the difference between the actions and the outcomes, which is the things that we do and did they actually get the outcomes that we wanted? And and what we see is that the trap is to add more and more controls to ensure that everything that we planned, our features are exactly to spec, and that in that way it will result in the outcomes. But in reality, that won't happen because we started with a bad idea that wasn't insight driven. So instead, we should just let teams have the freedom to set and adjust their own plans to meet these goals, and to do so in a much more empowered way. And what this means is to become product led, where you ruthlessly focus on solving customers' problems to drive business results, and you're focused around outcomes, not output. And because of the fact that we'll do this through experimentation, like we've been talking about, we now want our leadership to focus instead on strategic intent and where the major opportunities and threats are on a much longer time horizon, on a vision time horizon. So the way that we can set intent is by using objectives and key results. If you haven't heard of OKRs, objectives and key results before, I highly recommend reading the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr. He is one of the famous investors in Google. He gave them this tool. It was developed ultimately by Andy Grove, but it was evangelized by John Doerr and made popular by Google. And the way you develop them is that you first start by identifying your business model. And for Amazon, it is that there's a customer that needs to find, purchase, have delivered, and review things from a business. And connecting those two sides of the business is key for them. And ultimately, you then develop what's called a flywheel. And a flywheel is a set of key things that you're going to do as a strategy that will allow you to continuously have an advantage. And in fact, as you develop this flywheel, you can set strategic objectives related to it in order to be successful again and again and again. So Amazon's flywheel, which really for its logistics, fulfillment and capability has remained the same, is that they offer low prices and fast delivery, which attracts customers, which attracts sellers, which allows them to get higher return on their assets because they're getting more volume, and then that allows them to lower prices more, and get faster delivery. And really, it's been about fast delivery. So this is their flywheel, and it's been quite effective. And the way that we do this is that we identify these objectives and key results at a company level, and then we cascade them down or through what we call directive OKRs, or we allow for teams to identify for themselves how they're going to go about meeting those OKRs in a directional capacity. Um, the idea is that your objective is defining the qualitative outcome or the high level goal, and your key results are going to be how you'll measure that you've achieved that objective. And so it can be in the form of input, output, or outcome. We highly recommend outcome where possible. And you want to pair quality with quantity and avoid aspects that could be negative for your business. So an example here is that if I want to sign 500 deals in order to drive up the number of sales to 10 million, I may want to make sure that my sales team has within their key results both customer satisfaction scores as well as other scores around um, output in terms of quotes and calls. Um, Here I have marketing as the objective to get 12,000 leads, and I want them to have outcomes of click-through rate of 10%, being number 5 on Google and having 20% subscription rate. So those are all outcomes. Once you have an OKR, you can now treat it as a special KPI or key performance indicator that matters to your company. And you can then use it to drive what we call the lean analytics cycle, where you pick an OKR, sorry, you pick a KPI that really matters, you draw the line, and that's going to be your key results. And then you go through the process of finding ways in which you can either find a commonality by exploring data, or you can make a good guess without data to develop a hypothesis and either design a test, do an experiment, as we talked about, or make changes in production to get even a higher level test back. And you can see if you move the needle. And if you move the needle, then you can continue on to the next OKR. You can decide to pivot or give up if it doesn't move, or you can draw a new line, or you can try again. And this cycle, this lean analytics cycle, allows teams to continuously attack these challenges and to do so in their own, under their own direction. And it's by fitting in these experiments into the other work with the team, which is building and fixing different parts of the product, that allows us to run continuous experiments from previous experiments, insights, customer input. Stakeholders can provide insights as well. We still want them to come to the table, and we'll be able to run experiments and learn some more. So with that, I know we're just at time, but I wanted to give you the quick and dirty about the Amazon Prime example. Amazon Prime was an example of an excellent case of using the product operating model, where uh, Prime was having issues with Amazon was having issues with growth rates. They were trying to grow, and they knew that they were going to continue to have issues, especially around the areas of convenience. And so, in order to come up with a way to solve for that problem and continue their growth, they developed a vision type, which is a PRFAQ, a press release with frequently asked questions. And that press release with frequently asked questions identified a really great experience for convenience. And what the team did was the teams went about testing different types of shipping options: super saver shipping, fast super saver shipping, free 2-day shipping. And then these experiments were integrated with a customer loyalty program for an annual fee for standard shipping. And those experiments that, again, they were rolled out over time, and they looked at how they impacted purchasing and buying behavior and who cared about it, who didn't. What they found was that the customers that bought the most were the ones that demanded the highest level of convenience. And they actually were very price insensitive. And through that insight and through all these experiments, they came up with Amazon Prime. And Prime has been a huge shift for Amazon ever since, in terms of their ability to achieve their revenue goals. It accounts now for more than half of their revenue. And it was through these experiments they were able to take the risk of guaranteeing these low cost delivery options or rapid free delivery options with just a single subscription every year. And so the way that they did this ultimately was through shipping experiments, emphasizing the idea um, of trying to achieve these business outcomes through using fully empowered product teams to experiment and to do so even in ways that made even the CEO Jeff Bezos a little nervous about potential outcomes because they could have lost money on this significantly. But it has changed Amazon forever, and of course, all of us today we don't even think about it; we just expect it. All right. Looking at Q&A, so we have when it comes to co-location and collaboration, how can fully remote teams make this happen? Um, I'm gonna answer that with fully remote teams have to uh, have to create a simulated co-location experience, and they also need to make sure that they're building trust and systems that allow them to rapidly interact, especially in the product trio. That product trio, they need to meet each other in person a couple of times and regularly. And it's worth the investment because it delivers the results because that product trio really does do a lot of problem solving. So I would say that remote teams can work well. Your engineers, as long as they occasionally get together um, with the designers and the product trio, as long as they can do a little bit of upfront relationship building for trust, I think it's fine. But the goal would be simulate uh, co-location where possible. We actually did that when I was at IBM. We had two locations where one location where both locations would go into a room, and we had then at the end of each table a big screen which then had a camera that showed into the other room. It was like we were on two sides of the same table. And that was really, really effective. And we were running in empowered product teams building things for the National Archives. So experiment with it and figure out how to do that well. Um, so then we've got another question, which is how to be as successful as product manager working remotely. I think I just answered that one. Um, I would say how to make a good PRD in practice. Um, so a project requirements document is something that we want to, where possible, make it about the the vision, the future of what it is that we're going to create. So a really great example of a PRD that can be kind of decomposed down is the PR FAQ that Amazon used in order to develop the Prime offering. And so those ideas, basically the idea is define the outcome, the feeling, but then set up those problems to solve for your engineers. We're going to talk more about in the next presentation, but you need to set up the problems for your engineers to solve to create the experience that you've already prototyped. And the prototype itself is already a wonderful set of requirements for anyone who looks at it. It's like a picture says 1,000 words. Oftentimes, through the prototype and a little bit of description of what's to come next, and writing good user stories together in that process of developing out what you're going to build in your 2-week sprints, you're going to end up not needing significant amounts of PRD documentation beyond that. We really want it to be something that you interact with. Um, OKR KPI, which is better from Daniel. I would say that the OKR should be your focus because that's your goal. But the KPIs are good for sensing health metrics and other things that you want to know about on your team. I'm just going to go with 2 or 3 more here. I'm going to look for some ones that are a little bit more nuanced. And here's a good one. As an individual contributor at a company, how can you influence the adoption of these strategies? The product operating model philosophy. The best way to do it, and in fact, if there is a book that I would say that will help you get there, it's Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres. And in this book, she literally at the back says, look, I know that you're probably not in a position to lead company-wide transformation. If you were, you probably wouldn't be reading this book. You'd probably be calling me for, coming in to help, or another product coach. But the thing is that you can start small, start iterating, start challenging with data the assumptions that are in the requirements that you receive. And if you can prove out with small wins and fast examples that you can come up with a better way of building, just just really orient it around risk to say, there's a lot of risk here. Here are all the assumptions that we're making. I'd like to test some of these assumptions before we go forward, because otherwise we may end up wasting a lot of time and effort and a lot of resources. And surely there are some things that we know we should do. But let me go test these assumptions now on this plan before we get started, or on this key part of the plan. So focus on risk, focus on the assumptions, get others involved on your team, and then see if you can create some space to start experimenting and coming up with better ideas. And I think the results will speak for themselves once you do. I actually have another story I'll tell you next time, which is all about how we had two teams at IBM, who one which did 3 to 6 months of discovery, and another one which jumped right into delivery. And by the end, the team that had done all the discovery work up front ended up delivering a more rigorous, sustaining product that was able to had a lot less technical debt, had a lot higher customer reviews, and the other team ended up then working on improvements on their features, while the team that did all the discovery work refactored the other team's work. So I'll tell you all about that in another story next time. But I would just say that you can actually prove and surprise yourself and those around you with the data and experiments that you do, just how much there is to learn by doing a little bit of experimentation and prototyping. So I look forward to talking with you all then. Again, I appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one in about a month.